Okay, welcome everybody to the third event of the Syntax Silk Road. Today we are going to have as a speaker Caterina Bonan from the University of Cambridge, and she holds a PhD from the University of Geneva, working on the topic of Wh-in-Situ in Northern Italian dialects, and nowadays she's working at the University of Cambridge under the supervision of Professor Adam Ledgway in a project on cleft structure and interrogatives funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation. So I can give the word to Caterina, and thank you again for being here.
Okay, hello, good morning everyone. As a lot of you know, over the last 20 years, authors such as Cecilia Poletto, Jean-Yves Pollock and Nicola Munaro have proposed a derivation for Northern Italian Wh-in-Situ, whereby the close internal WH element is not really in situ, that is in the external merge position, but rather it is moved to the left periphery of the close, okay, prior to movement of all IP internal material to even higher left peripheral functional projections. From these very influential works, which were based mainly but not exclusively, okay, on the variety known as Bellunese, follow a very widespread belief, namely that the phenomenon of Northern Italian Wh-in-Situ as a whole is of a different type compared to its Asian cousins. Today, I wish to show you that Northern Italian Wh-in-Situ, so the close internal Wh-in-Situ, close internal WH words of the Northern Italian can indeed move, yet not higher than the low left periphery, so that is the periphery of the LISO VP. And that Northern Italian Wh-in-Situ is actually more similar to Asian Wh-in-Situ than we used to think. Okay, so as I'm sure all of you know, there are at least two types of Wh-in-Situ, okay? So one is called the pure type, as in the Mandarin Chinese example in one, okay, in which Wh-in-Situ is basically the default interrogative strategy, okay? And then there is what is commonly referred to as optional Wh-in-Situ, which is very common in the Romance domain and is characterized by a relatively peaceful, I'd say, coexistence of total WH fronting into the high left periphery and Wh-in-Situ, okay? And you have an example thereof in two, okay, an example from French. Now, I wish to point out that a third type of Wh-in-Situ, which can be pure or optional, is a very robust phenomenon that has been attested and discussed for many languages, okay, but has almost gone unnoticed in the Romance literature. And you have a bunch of references here, okay, and many more can be found in my dissertation from 2019. You have an example of what I call fake Wh-in-Situ, okay, in 3. And it's an example from the Venetian variety of Trevisan on which I worked in my dissertation, okay? So as you can see in 3, in this variety of Trevisan, the natural translation to the English question, to whom did you give the saucepan, is have you given to whom the saucepan, okay, with the indirect object that precedes the direct object in the phonetic string. Examples like those in 3 will be used today to claim that Northern Italian Wh-in-Situ cannot be derived via movement into the high left periphery, okay, contra Poletto and Alia, and that what we are dealing with is Asian Wh-in-Situ, plus, in some cases, a low movement of the WH element into the low left periphery. Okay, so I have a summary of what I will be saying later on in the handout, but I don't have the time to go over it, okay? So I will send you the handout if you're interested. Now, if you will, I would like to move to section 1, okay, of the handout together with you and go back to example 3, which I am repeating here as 4. So looking at 4, you will certainly be asking yourselves whether the order in direct object here is the base order, first of all, and then, if not, whether it is derived by moving the indirect object to the left or the direct object to the right, okay? So in 5, you will find the answer to this question. So first of all, the order in direct object followed by the direct object is not the base order of Trevisan. Indeed, in Trevisan, the base order requires the direct object to precede the indirect object, which is in turn followed by adverbials of time and place in this precise order. So look at the unmarked interrogatives, okay, in 6 and 7. In 6, you have examples that feature a ditransitive verb, so to give. And as you can see, while the direct object, indirect object order in 6 is perfectly fine, so the apples to John, in this case, to John the apples is completely out. In a similar fashion, sorry, because I have the example scattered between 2 pages. In a similar fashion, in 7, in which, you know, an adverbial of time and one of place follow the direct object, so yesterday night at the festival, this one is completely fine. While the examples, the order in 7b, in which you have place, time is degraded, and then any order in which an adverbial, okay, is surfaces higher than the direct object is out, as you can see in C. Now, with this in mind, it is worth of note that the declarative orders that we've just seen are absolutely not reproduced when an answer-seeking question bears either on the indirect object, okay, or on an adverbial. Indeed, here in 8, you see that the interrogative, the required interrogative order in case in the cases in which you have the transitive verb is indirect object followed by the direct object. So to whom the apples, while the apples to whom is out. And similarly, in 9, you see that the WH adverb of place, quando, has to move to the position that precedes the direct object for the sentence to be felicitous. So when gnocchi is perfect, while gnocchi when is out. So given the very strict declarative orders that I showed in 6 and in 7, in my dissertation, I have claimed that it seems reasonable to posit that the WH elements, sorry, the close internal WH elements of Trevisan move out of their external merge position, okay, to an internal merge position, which is, let's say for now, right above little VP, okay, as suggested in the sketch in 10. Now, of course, this movement, if present, cannot be there only when it is visible in the phonetic string, okay? So, for example, with indirect objects and with adverbials, as in the examples that we've just seen. But you have to have this kind of movement also in the cases in which the movement is string vacuous, okay? So, for example, with a direct object, as in the example in 11. Okay, so also in cases like, have you seen who, where you can't see whether there's movement, I'm positing that movement is there, as in 12. Okay, so why am I implying here that what moves is the WH element and not the material that follows it? Well, first of all, as you can see from the example in 11, it is clear that in revision, there is not a PF constraint that disallows WH elements to occupy, okay, the main stress position. Then it is also clear that in revision, when you have a dislocated constituent, this needs to be phrased as an independent intonational phrase, okay, with what was called like common intonation. And you need a clitic, okay, when available, you need the clitic co-index with the dislocated phrase to be there. And also, when relevant, you need number and gender agreement on the past participle. So, for example, in 13, here, the ipomi, the apples, is dislocated to the right, okay? As you can see, plural agreement is realized on the past participle dati, which means given, and a clitic is obligatorily realized, e in this case, which is co-indexed with ipomi, okay, the dislocated element. In the absence of either property, the dislocation here would fail. The felicity, again, example scattered between 2 pages, sorry. The felicity of the low movement hypothesis is further validated by the observation that in the presence of a close internal WH adverb, like quando, okay, in 14 and 15, an in-situ direct object can normally only precede the indirect object, whereas it is free to either precede or follow the indirect object when it is clitically right dislocated, okay, as in 15. Another reason to believe that what moves in Trevisan is indeed the WH elements come from the observation that in this language, also the strategy that has been called marginalization in works such as Antinucci and Cinque, 1977, and then Cardinaletti and also Samet Ludovici in 2015. Okay, this strategy is not available in Trevisan, and nor is the possibility to dislocate elements without, let's say, clitic resumption, okay? I have some examples here, but I will move on to the rest of the analysis because I think it is more interesting. So on the basis of these observations, what I have argued is that the distribution of close internal WH elements in Trevisan must be a byproduct of the movement of the WH element itself, okay? And more precisely, a movement that I will try to characterize in what follows. Look at 18, okay? So in the question in 18, have you eaten when the cherries? You can see that the close internal WH element quando, when, surfaces in a position, in a linear position that is right below the one occupied by the active past participle. Now, the question that one might want to ask, especially if it's someone who doesn't work in romance, is, but if it's quando that moves and not the cherries, wouldn't we rather expect the past participle to follow the moved WH elements? Well, luckily, my hypothesis can be reconciled with the surface order in 18 in a relatively uncomplicated fashion. Indeed, Guglielmo Cinque in 1999, as I'm sure all of you know, claimed that the adverbs are not adjoined, as we used to think before, so not adjoined to the list of VP, but they are located in the specifiers of functional projections, within IP, which are rigidly ordered. And what he showed is that the active past participle or languages like Italian, for example, must move to the head to the left of the adverbial tutto, all. Okay, now this claim, luckily, also stands in Trevisan, okay? And you have examples here of the past participle that moves past tutto, okay? Past ben, well, which is another adverb that is commonly considered a very low adverb. Okay, and this kind of movement is sketched here in 22. There is a section in my handout, which again is too long for this presentation, okay, in which I show all of the movement properties of the Trevisan finite verbs, okay. Now, the most important part here, okay, for the sake of my presentation, is this one, okay, in which I claim that I show actually that the lowest position that is targeted by the finite verb of Trevisan is structurally higher than the lower adverb space, okay? So this is something that I show in the examples that precede. While what I show here in 27, the Trevisan active past participle must target an aspectual position which is located within the low adverb space, okay, as you see in 27. So what you get in Trevisan is orders such as Nogo mia magna tutto, with magna the surface in between mia and tutto. Now, for those of you who don't know this, mia is, I would say, commonly believed to mark the extreme border, okay, the extreme left border of the low adverb space, okay? So you have mia, and then you have the past participle, and then tutto or ben, for example. So this means that while the past participle moves, it doesn't move higher than the low adverb space. 27 is compatible with an analysis of close internal WH elements whereby the WH element is internally merged in a position that is located in the periphery of little VP, okay? So the order that we observed in 18, where we had the past participle, the WH adverbial, and then the direct object, follows straightforwardly. Okay, straightforwardly, sorry. So it is sketched here. You have magna that moves to a functional projection, possibly an aspectual one. And then you have quando that moves to another functional projection, which is right above little VP. Okay. Crucially, the functional projection that hosts the close internally moved WH element here, okay, must lie lower than the low adverb space, okay, and so where in the low left periphery. And why? Because as you can see here, the order that you get in interrogatives is one such as 29, so one in which you have the past participle and then the low adverbs, and then in a lower position you have the WH elements, okay? Quando tutto ben would be out, the only possible orders are past participle, tutto or ben, and then quando or any other WH elements. Because of this, I wish to claim that Trevisan licenses instances of fake Wh-in-Situ. So what we have here are not WH elements in their external merge position, but WH elements moved to the low left periphery of the clause, okay? And very interestingly, in a work from 2017, Cheng and Bayan observed this same pattern in a lot of languages spoken in South Asia, okay? And what they claimed is that these languages constitute a typologically interesting and significant type between full moving and like real in situ languages. And what I want to claim is that in Trevisan can be treated on a par with these languages described in works such as Cheng and Bayer 2017. Now, let me tell you why I think that the two existing treatments of Northern Italian Wh-in-Situ are not tenable for Trevisan. So, for those of you who don't know, over the last 20 years, two very influential syntactic investigations of Northern Italian Wh-in-Situ have been proposed, okay? One is the one that I mentioned in the introduction to this talk. So the one that that has been proposed by Cecilia Poletto, Jean-Yves Pollock, and Nicola Munaro, and other people with them, whereby the WH element is moved, okay, but to the high left periphery. And then there is another, I'd say, completely opposite claim made by Manzini and Savoia, whereby the WH elements of Northern Italian dialects don't move at all. They stay in their base position. So my claim, of course, is that neither is tenable for Trevisan, and also that we actually need more ingredients in the computation of WH interrogatives to be able to account for the wide range of variability that is attested, okay, in the WH answer-seeking WH questions of in-situ languages. So very quickly, there cannot be a simple derivation like the one proposed by Manzini and Savoia for Trevisan, because if Trevisan WH elements moved at a left, you wouldn't expect this type of movement that have been, or this type of surface order that I've been describing, okay? Then moving to the remnant IP movement analysis, this is not the official name, it's just a label that I use to, you know, make clear, just to, you know, to have a label to apply to this. So I call the first one the covert movement analysis, and this one the remnant type movement analysis, okay? Just for you to know what I'm talking about. What is it? It's an analysis that takes strings such as the one from Bellunese in 30. So, a tu parezza che, have you prepared what? Meaning, what did you prepare? To be derived as in 31, okay? So mind that this is an oversimplification of the story, okay? But just for you to understand, for these authors, an order such as a tu parezza che is derived starting from an input like tu apparezza che. Then there is a first step, okay, which is left peripheral. So the WH element is moved from the external merge site into the left periphery in a very low operator position. And then further displacements take place, which move all of the IP internal material, okay, including the remnant of the IP, into the high left periphery. And like this, you derive an order like tu apparezza che. Now, an analysis like 31 is based on theoretical and empirical factors, which I will overview very quickly here, okay? And this includes the claim by Kane that there cannot be covert movements of any kind. And then also the assumption that the different sequences that are observed in languages such as French and Bellunese at spell out must reflect the interplay of the invariant structure of the high left periphery, okay? And the close connection between the two WH words what words of these languages, que and que, and the question formation strategy known as subject-lytic inversion. Okay, so if you don't know this, just to be clear, in Bellunese, okay, going back to 30, che can only surface close internally. Okay, so it is not possible to front it, and che, like any other WH element in this language, is always construed with subject-lytic inversion. Conversely, what we see in French is different. Okay, so que in French must always be fronted. Okay, as in 32. You cannot have it in situ, okay, as in 32C. As-tu mangé que is out. However, que always requires subject-lytic inversion to be realized, okay? And que tu as mangé without subject-lytic inversion is out, while the possibility to not have subject-lytic inversion is perfectly fine with all other WH elements. So now look at the sketch in 33. In Poletto, Pollock, and Munaro's framework, the reason why French que appears close initially, as in 30, while Bellunese che occupies a close initial position as spell out, as we saw in 32, is that only the latter, so only che in Bellunese, requires complex computations that take place after WH movements and displace all IP internal elements to the high left periphery. Okay, so you have the comparison here. I think that an extension of the analysis in 31, okay, an extension to Trevisan is not desirable. So first of all, for some reasons that I want to outline now, and then for empirical reasons coming from Trevisan. So I believe that the legitimacy of the parallel in 33 is somehow threatened both on synchronic and on diachronic grounds. So first of all, as Manzini and Savoia pointed out, and I also show that this, I show this extensively in my dissertation, okay? In all of the Romance languages that we know of, except French, the distribution of subject-lytic inversion is orthogonal to the position in which the WH element appears, okay, in the phonetic stream, which means that if one language has subject-lytic inversion, subject-lytic inversion will always be there in the answer-seeking WH interrogatives of the language, okay, regardless of the surface position of the WH element. In this respect, French constitutes an exception in that it is the only language in which subject-lytic inversion is possible, yet disallowed in the case in which the WH element stays in the base position. Then I also think that a parallel between Bellunese che and French quoi would be actually be better justified. Okay, I'm 35. So, and it would be better justified, not only because of the distributional properties of French quoi, which, as you can see in 35, is only able to appear close internally, but also because quoi in late Old French was actually pronounced que, which makes it additionally closer to Bellunese che than French que, which is a clitic WH word. It must also be noted that, as Urshlansky pointed out to me when I was a PhD student in Geneva, one does not expect long construals to be possible in a language which derives Wh-in-Situ, you know, using the lowest part of the high left periphery. However, these type of construals are attested Intervision by myself, and also in other Lombard and Venetian varieties by Manzini and Savoia. And actually, these are always been claimed possible in Bellunese, in work from 1999 by Munaro. So in Bellunese, it is possible to say, have you said that he bought what? Okay, meaning what did you say he bought? Or have you said that he's gone where? Meaning where did you say he went? Therefore, I believe that it is possible that the availability of what I call a remnant IP movement analysis is actually threatened also for Bellunese. Then there is the question, of course, of deviation complexity and, you know, the question of language acquisition and how very complex structures in which trace containing chunks are moved several times can be acquired. And then I believe that another point that disfavors an extension of this type of analysis to Northern Italian dialects is that having WH movement to the high left periphery in Bellunese would mean that we need to posit the existence of a major typological divide between Bellunese and Trevisian and all other Lombard and Venetian varieties, okay? And I believe that while it would be technically plausible to posit a very big typological divide between, for example, Chinese and Bellunese, it is not really desirable to have, you know, such a huge gap, typological gap between Bellunese and very closely related varieties such as, for example, Trevisian. Then empirically, and this is like a very simple argument, okay? Empirically, if you want to have that kind of order that I showed for Trevisian, okay, in a remnant AP movement type of analysis, you will need that element, the WH element, no, sorry, you will need to have what follows the WH element that moves either to the low portion of the left periphery or to the highest part of the IP, okay, prior to WH movement in order to derive the observed orders. However, these kind of movements, okay, this kind of, let's say, topicalizations that I have here in 37 and 38 would be completely stipulative for Trevisian and they would come with no evidence, okay, in their favor. And because of this, I think that a left peripheral derivation of Northern Italian Wh-in-Situ cannot be maintained. Now, let me tell you something about the WH focus parallel on which I have been working in the last, I think, 2 years. So what I claim, as you understood, is that the Trevisian close internal WH elements undergo movement, and that this type of movement I will show is focus movement, okay? Like not proper WH movement as we know it, but focus movement, okay, driven by a focus feature, a movement that targets FOC. Now, analysis and along these lines have been proposed for many a language, okay? And so some authors are going to say that the position targeted is Belletti's FOC in the low left periphery, and some other authors, okay, depending on when the paper was written, say that the position targeted is the specifier of little VP. But I think that basically we're talking about the exact same thing and the exact same type of movement. So in order to characterize the type of movement that WH elements of Trevisian undergo, I observed the behavior of contrastive focus in Trevisian. What I showed is that in Trevisian, contrastively focused constituents always surface close internally, okay, as you can see in 39 and 40. And they surface not in their base position, okay, but in a derived one, okay? So like they mirror the behavior of WH elements that we've just seen. Okay, so look at 39b. Here you have, I lent to Tony the book. Okay, you cannot have the book to Tony. It's actually marginal. And in a similar fashion, you need to say things like 40b. I went Saturday to the circus, while to the circus Saturday is very marginal. And I think this is how I describe it in my recent paper. I think this is a contact phenomenon due to the fact that all speakers of Trevisan also speak standard Italian, okay? But while these orders, these base orders, okay, are not completely disregarded, they are never the order that you elicit, okay? The elicited order is always the one in which you have movement of the contrastive focus, while the base order is basically just accepted when you ask for grammaticality judgments. Okay, so because of 39b and 40b, I have claimed that also the contrastive foci of Trevisan targets a low position, okay, in the close. And because Adriana Belletti in 2004 proposed, posited the existence of a periphery right above little VP, in which there is a focal projection surrounded by two topic positions, I believe that we can say that the targeted position is Belletti's foc, okay, in the periphery of little VP. And I sketched this here in 41, okay, you see, you have, again, the active past participle that moves to an aspectual position, a functional position, and then you have the contrastive foci that move from within little VP into the periphery of the little VP. Now, I think that we can claim that in Trevisan, Belletti's foc is the functional projection where focus is always encoded, okay? So contrary, for example, to standard Italian, as described by Luigi Rizzi and many people after him, which encodes focus in the high left periphery. Significantly, in Trevisan, total fronting of contrastive foci is somewhat more marginal, okay? And you can see that, you have the examples in 42, in no matrix environments, total fronting of contrastive foci in Trevisan must be construed with a co-indexed close internal clitic, okay, as here. So I wonder, this book, okay, as opposed to that other book, who read it? You need to have it, okay? While the presence of the clitic is absolutely out when the focus stays close internally. And I am saying close, and I say close internally, because in these cases too, we observe movement of the focus. So sto libro here is not in the base position, but again, moved to the periphery of little VP. Now, Orvath in 1986 claimed that whenever languages have a special position for contrastively focused elements, this precise position should also be available for WH elements. Orvath explained this property by building on the interpretational similarities displayed by focus and WH elements. So, according to her, in contrast to simple new information, simple focus of new information, contrastive focus operates over a closed set. And similarly, the restriction of the WH elements is drawn from a contextually relevant set of entities, which are, let's say, possible arguments for the function that is denoted by the background of the question. Okay, therefore, an extension of the movement paradigm that I suggested in 41 for contrastive foci, an extension of this to the close internal WH elements of Trevisan is, I think, rather straightforward and also appears well justified semantically. Okay. Now, very quickly, I used a framework in which WH elements do not appear alone in the structure, but they are construed with a Q particle, okay? I did so based my analysis on the framework elaborated by Cable in 2010, okay? So there are languages that have the configuration that is known as Q projection. What is important to know, to keep in mind about these, if you don't know the analysis, is that when you have Q projection, the Q particle selects the WH element, and when the feature on the Q particle is targeted, okay, by the Q feature in the high left periphery, the whole chunk is moved, okay? In a way, the WH element is dragged along by the Q particle. Conversely, in the cases known as Q adjunction, okay, what you have is a Q particle that is more free, and so the WH element stays closed internally while the Q particle is attracted alone into the left periphery. Now, I perfectly know that adjunction is not a cartography-friendly notion. However, I think that there might be other ways, okay, to formulate this kind of relationship that is entertained between the WH element and the Q particle in these languages. And what is important to keep in mind here is that these are languages in which the WH element stays closed internally while the Q particle moves to the high left periphery, okay? So based on these observations, Cable proposed a typology of Wh-in-Situ and some parameters which, according to him, explain the WH interrogatives of all the languages of the world, okay? So for him, Wh-in-Situ languages come in two different shapes. So one is the QP languages, which have, you know, this close relationship between the WH element and the Q particle. And what you get is Wh-in-Situ because the configuration stays closed internally until LF, meaning that these languages have covert movements. And then you have the languages that I have just described, in which, you know, there's Q adjunction, and so the WH element stays closed internally, and the Q particle moves to the left periphery alone. Okay, so for Cable, everything related to interrogative WH movements can be explained using the setting of minimally the three parameters that I list here. Okay, so the projection parameter, whether a language has Q projection or Q adjunction, the Q movement parameter, so whether interrogative movement is overt or covert, and the Q pronunciation parameter. Okay, for Cable, all languages have Q particles, and some of them have phonetically realized Q particles, while some others, like Trevisan, for example, have silent Q particles. In my dissertation, I have claimed that positing the existence of Q particles in Romance is not an ad hoc strategy, okay? So first of all, Cable himself provided multiple reasons, okay, in support of the existence of Q particles in all languages of the world, and especially those in which these are silent. Then there is also a work from 2011 by Abo and Fau, in which it is suggested that WH movement has to be dissociated from interrogative force, okay? For these authors, WH elements are not inherently interrogatives, and actually they do not participate in close typing at all. For them, there might just be a cross-linguistic requirement, okay, for the WH element to be there in order to be able, of course, to identify the content of the question. Then another reason for positing the existence of Q particles in Trevisan and Romance, in my opinion, comes from the fact that in the cartographic enterprise, the existence of one functional head in one natural language is enough to posit the existence of that very head in the functional spine of all of the languages of the world. And so because of that, I think it is theoretically desirable to extend the presence of Q particles also to the languages in which these are silent. Another argument comes from Trevisan. I believe that it is important to acknowledge the puzzling behavior of a Y word of Trevisan, perché, which I studied with Shlonsky recently. And to know that perché in long extraction contexts clearly shows that the in situ matrix deviation interrogatives of Trevisan in this configuration, in these structures, there is interrogative movement into the high left periphery, even though nothing is to be seen, okay? So if you look at the example in 53, just let me tell you something before. Perché is a very regular WH word in the sense of Rizzi 2001, Stepanov and Sai 2008, in the sense that it is merged directly in the left periphery and doesn't trigger subject-predicate inversion, okay? It's the only WH word of Trevisan that doesn't trigger subject-predicate inversion. And you have an example thereof in 53, okay? Why are you saying that she called you, okay? In this case, perché is short construed with the matrix verb, okay? It is merged in the higher periphery and no subject-predicate inversion is found. Conversely, and very interesting, I think, in the case in B, in which perché is construed with the lower verb, okay, with to call, and so it is moved from the embedded periphery into the matrix one, what you see is that it is obligatory to have subject-predicate inversion. So regardless of the explanation that we want to provide for subject-predicate inversion, it is clear that its presence witnesses the fact that interrogative movement of some kind has taken place, okay, interrogative movement to the higher left periphery. What kind of movements am I talking about? Well, in the case of 53B, that would be extraction of perché through fin, okay? But in the case of yes-no questions, for example, that would be a polar particle. In the case of QP fronting, that would be movements of the QP through fin. And in the case of in situ interrogatives, it would be something like 55, okay? We can't see anything, but the presence of subject-predicate inversion here witnesses that something has moved through fin and somehow activated the higher left periphery, okay? And the movement into consideration is movements of the silent Q particle. Okay, so attention, this is not, here I have just a section saying, this is not a sentential particle such as the ones, you know, described for Northern Italian dialects by Munario, Poletto and many other authors, and it is not the doubling, a doubling element of Northern Italian WH doubling for reasons that I explored in my dissertation. And also, it is not this crazy complementizer that we have in Trevisan, which looks like if, but I described as being way lower, and somehow, you know, it is there to help to give us the chance to have in situ also in indirect deviation interrogatives. Okay, it's like the ones in 60. So with all of these elements in mind, I have proposed a theory that I call WH to FOC. Okay, so movement of the WH element into Belletti's FOC. For me, what I want to suggest is that the derivation of Trevisan WH in situ interrogatives features two steps. One is low focus movement, okay, done as you can see here. There is an agreement relation that is created between a focus feature in the head of FOC and the focus feature on the WH phrase. And because of a requirement for move, the whole chunk constituted by the WH phrase and the Q particle is moved to the specifier FOC. And then, of course, since we need to also check a higher Q feature in the high left periphery, okay, this Q adjoining WH element that is now in the specifier FOC is going to, you know, agree with the Q feature in focus in the high left periphery, and overt movement of the Q particle takes place, okay? Movement from the specifier of FOC to the specifier of Ritz's focus in the high left periphery. There is something else here that I claim, but I don't really have time to go over this now. And that is that we can explain the differences between, you know, the distribution of foci in languages such as Standard Italian, for example, and Trevisan, by saying that languages vary along what I call the feature parameter, which is some languages such as Trevisan scatter the features related to interrogative movement between the low periphery and the high periphery. And so they have focus in the low periphery and Q in the high periphery, while other languages like Standard Italian bundle the two features in the high left periphery. Okay, I will send you the handout if you are interested in this, okay? And then there are a bunch of predictions, of course, related to you know, a combination of all of these variables. So whether we have feature scattering or feature bundling, whether there's a requirement for move, whether the Q particle is open or silent, and so on and so forth. Now, I just want to make a brief aside on language change, because this is really important when we compare Northern Italian WH-in-Situ and Asian WH-in-Situ. So there have been works on pure WH-in-Situ that illustrated that there exist languages that underwent interesting typological changes. Watanabe 2003, for example, claimed that in Japanese, we went from overt fronting into the high left periphery, okay, to modern day unmoved WH-in-Situ. So examples from old Japanese are provided in 68, okay. Now, this would mean that languages can go from total fronting into the high left periphery to unmoved WH-in-Situ. However, other works, such as Aldridge 2009, claim that Watanabe's analysis is actually wrong, because he misunderstood the position occupied by the genitive subject, okay? And so for her, the movement, the targeted position is way lower and is actually in the periphery of little PP, okay? Therefore, if Aldrich is right, that means that we can extend my WH2FOC movement analysis also to Old Japanese in the Nara period, okay, in which there was focus agreement down below in the low periphery, but also focus movement, okay, contrary to what we have today, that is only focus agreement, sorry, and no focus movement. The same observation was made also for archaic Chinese, okay, in a work of hers from 2010, in which, for example, you have 70B. You see that you get the order high, who deceive, okay, whereas in, if I understand correctly, in modern day Mandarin Chinese, you would have I deceive who, okay? So that means that in archaic Chinese, you had WH2FOC, while today we have moved to unmoved WH-in-Situ. So what I think we have is just focus agreement and no requirement for movement anymore, okay? You have an example, sorry, an illustration in 74 and 75, okay? In which I show that there is also a parallel that can be made between the behavior of contrastive focus in Chinese, for example, and Trevisan. And here I'm using examples from Bonan and Del Gobbo and Bonan, okay? What they show is that contrastive focus is unmoved in present day Chinese, okay? And so you have a focus in situ as in 47, what I show here. While in Trevisan, what we have is the same story plus a requirement for move, which displaces, okay, a contrastively focused constituent like sto libro to the specifier of FOC. Okay, therefore, no, not therefore, sorry. Conveniently, for the sake of the theory that I'm presenting here, a movement of this type, focus movement of this type, was proposed for Aldrich, also for archaic Chinese, okay, in which, according to her, focused constituents had to move to the periphery of litho VP. Okay, so that would mean that you have the same parallel. Archaic Chinese had WH2FOC and movements of contrastive foci to the specifier of FOC, and today has unmoved both. Okay, so Trevisan, in a sense, is archaic Chinese. Okay, so here I suggest a bunch of evolutionary patterns of the grammar of Q, but basically these are those that I've just suggested. Okay, those that we observe in the development of archaic Chinese, for example, or of Japanese. And what I have claimed, therefore, is that the 4 parameters that need to be taken into consideration when we study the answer-seeking WH interrogatives of the languages of the world are, okay, whether these have QP or Q adjunction, whether the pronunciation parameter, okay, so is set as positive or negative, and have implemented Cable's original story saying that some languages, such as optional WH-in-Situ languages, can have both QP projection and adjunction of Q. And then there's the movement parameter again, okay? In some languages you have just a requirement for agree only, and in some others agree plus move. And then there's this interrogative feature parameter, okay, so whether languages bundle or scatter the interrogative features. I'm almost done. There's a section here that I don't absolutely have time to go over, but is a section in which I suggest that this analysis in terms of WH2FOC can be extended to all of the dialects that I know of spoken in Northern Italy, including Bellunese, okay? And what I claim is that basically what we have is both cases of languages like revision, in which focus agreement, low focus agreement is followed by focus movements, be it of foci or of WH phrases, and languages in which we observe a behavior such as the one of Chinese, for example, present day Chinese, in which both WH elements and foci stay close internally and are unmoved. Okay, so this is a very long story, but in conclusion, what I want to claim is that low movement of WH elements is, and is more specifically, low movement driven by the need to check a focus feature, is cross-linguistically a very robust phenomenon, and one which must be taken into consideration, okay? So here, I didn't have the time to provide evidence, okay, for this kind of movement in other languages. But if you're interested, okay, you can look at the references, or you can look at my PhD dissertation, where I have a very big part, okay, on these other languages that have low focus movements. What I have provided here are only references, okay, for these languages. But what I think I have provided is extensive evidence of the existence of this movement in Romance, and more specifically in this variety of revision, okay? So to my understanding, the implementation of Q particles in Romance can give us a theory of Northern Italian Wh-in-Situ that is not only valid cross-linguistically, but it is also justified from the point of view of diachrony. My claim is that Cable's grammar of Q are implemented in the ways that I have discussed very quickly here and in detail in my dissertation, gives us a more economical understanding of the morphosyntax of Northern Italian Wh-in-Situ in general, and also of Bellunese interrogatives. So an understanding that is more economical than the one proposed in what I have called the remnant typing movement analysis. And crucially, okay, a derivation that does not imply that a very big typological distance exists between languages such as Bellunese and other very closely related Romance varieties spoken in Northern Italy. Therefore, long story short, I truly believe that at the end of the day, Northern Italian and Asian Wh-in-Situ are more similar than we used to think. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your nice presentation, very interesting and with a lot of material. So as you said, people can send you an email to get the handout.
Of course.
For the part to have a more complete overview.
Of course.
So if somebody has question, can use both the blue hand or write on the chat, I have a question. And for those who have who has the camera, I might be able to see some hands raised. Okay, so I see Victor Pan has a question, so we can move to him. So Victor, you can unmute, Professor Pan.
Hi, I was not supposed to ask the first question because I suppose that the specialist on the Italian languages should raise more questions. I do have a very short question actually. So it's very nice to take into consideration the micro variation view to look at the Wh-in-Situ strategies in different languages. So I think that one of the most important idea behind the Q particle or Q operator analysis is that when this Q operator is bound with the Wh-in-Situ, and then you once one assumes that this Q undergoes movement to the scope position, and this movement should be subject to locality constraints, right? So that's why in certain Wh-in-Situ languages, you see island effects or certain types of island effects, such as modern Japanese. So my question is that, have you observed some island effects in Trevisian or other Northern Italian dialects when you propose this Q morpheme analysis?
Yes, of course. Thank you for your question. In my dissertation, I have a big part on island effects. I actually had something in the handout too, which I didn't have time to, discuss with you. So in Northern Italian dialects, the story is here, okay? What we observe is that Bellunese, as described by Munaro, in a way constitutes an outcast, okay? In the sense that it does not allow Wh-in-Situ within islands to extraction. Conversely, in Trevisian, in the variety of Trevisian that I described, and also in all of the Lombard and Venetian varieties described by Manzini and Savoia in 2005 and 2011, Wh-in-Situ is perfectly fine, both within islands, okay? So, my explanation, I understand that you know Cable's story very well.
Right.
My explanation, okay, of this difference that we see between Trevisian, Lombard, and Venetian, and then this Bellunese, which is in a way is an outcast, is that in Bellunese, there must be the absence, okay, of what, look here, there you go. Bellunese must be one of the languages that Cable calls limited piping languages, okay, in the sense that, Bellunese must be a language in which agreement between the Q particle and the WH element must occur. And since it is impossible to have agreements, across an island, it is impossible to have Wh-in-Situ in the island, okay, in Bellunese. This is the example. This is my explanation for the Bellunese story, okay, based on, work on other languages by Cable. But what I show for, what Manzini and Savoia showed for many other Northern Italian languages, and what I show for Trevisian, is that Wh-in-Situ is perfectly fine. And what you have is two types of configurations, for example, in Trevisian, which is the one that I studied more in depth. So you have both the possibility to adjoin Q to the island. Okay, so you leave the island Situ and you see this movement of the silent Q particle because, of course, you get subject-critic inversion in the matrix high left periphery. Or what you can have in Trevisian, you need to force it a bit. I must be, how do you say that? I mean, I must tell you this. It's a construction that you must force a bit, okay? But it is possible. In Trevisian, you can have the massive piping of the whole island that Cable observed for languages like Tlingit, for example. So I have an example here, okay? In 92, it is possible to say things like, so a pig that weighs how much have you bought, okay? With what Cable calls piping past islands, okay? This is possible. And we know that languages such as English do not allow this, okay? So a fish that is how big do you want out, a book that who wrote did you buy out. And this is what the phenomenon that cable analyzed as, in these languages, there is a need for an agreement relationship to be there between the Q particle and the WH element. And this cannot apply across silence. And therefore, these languages cannot have WH in this kind of configuration. But these are perfectly fine in Trevision, and I have them in my dissertation. So yeah.
All right, thank you for this. Is very clear. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Professor Rizzi?
Yeah. Yes. Can you hear me? It's
yes.
Yeah, I've done. Okay. So it's yeah. I think the why paradigm that you presented is extremely interesting, with the difference between cases of locally construed why and long why extraction. In order to complete the paradigm, it would be interesting to also see what happens in simple why questions, right? So the immediate prediction, if you assume the story that why is always generated in a high position, is that even in simple sentences like why did he leave, you cannot have why in the low focus position. So you would have something like, why did he leave? Is the prediction correct? Or something more complicated is going on?
No, hi, thank you for your question. So the prediction is correct. And
Okay.
there is nothing very complicated going on. I have a paper that has just been accepted that I co-authored with Shlonsky. And yeah, what we show is that perché is a real left peripheral Y word. So impossible close internally, always fronted, and never triggers subject inversion.
Okay, so that's very strong evidence for the idea that Y is really different from all other WH elements. So, okay. So this was just a little data point that completes the paradigm that you gave. Now, I have a more general question that concerns I think your data clearly show, and your analysis clearly shows that WH elements must bear a double specification in a way or another, at least in main questions. Mm-hmm. So both a Q type specification and a focal type specification. And in some languages, these two specifications are licensed in the same position, syncretically somehow, whereas in your case, they clearly are dissociated. Now, what is not completely clear to me is how the Q specification on the WH element is satisfied, because one possibility that would come to mind is that, after all, there is a left movement. So you take your cases with the WH element in the low focus position, then there is some kind of Q requirement to satisfy. And this could involve covert movement, right? One reason that leads me to consider that option is that you want to end up with a logical form in which the WH element binds a variable and is in the right scopal position and has scope over the whole close. It may be interesting to try to phrase the question empirically and see if there is empirical evidence possibly distinguishing between covert movement analysis and, let's say, a pure agree analysis or a particle movement analysis of the kind that you have illustrated, which would be to check the sensitivity of the WH element to certain weak islands. And the simplest case that comes to mind is negative islands, right? So if you observe a sensitivity of negative islands, so something like the equivalent of who didn't you meet possible versus how didn't you solve the problem degraded, as in English, if you have that kind of asymmetry, that may, at least under certain assumptions, provide evidence for a covert movement analysis, because then you'd have the adjunct the adjunct argument asymmetry that would manifest itself. And this is a different case of island sensitivity from the one that you described in your answer to Victor. So I don't know if you have any comments on that. It seems to me that the whole of your story can be preserved also without assuming a variant of Cable's approach, and just assuming that the Q head is generated independently in the left periphery, and then everything else is done via checking and overt or covert movement. I don't know if you have any comments on
yes, I have a comment. Thank you for the question. So the very reason why I ended up deciding to, implement, to work on Cable's theory was that I have this movement of Perquet that shows that something moves to the left periphery. So I couldn't have, a Q operator high in the high left periphery. I needed specifically something that came from, somewhere IP internally and moved to the high left periphery. So I must admit that I haven't really thought of islands thinking about, this very known asymmetry between adjunct and argument islands, because I work on them as Cable does. Okay, I just tried to show that the Q analysis worked and was fine, and so I must admit that I don't really now have the data in mind, the data that you suggested for islands, and my very quick intuition now as a native speaker is that both are equally fine. Okay, now. The reason, you were asking about covert movement. This is something that I thought about a lot. And I would like to answer in a non-canonical way, asking you a question. Do you think it would be completely theoretically crazy to think that FOC in the low left periphery is criterial, and once something stops there, lands there, it is sent to interpretation, and that part of the story is taken care of, and then we take care of the Q part? What do you think? Or do I need to move the WH element to the left periphery in any case?
Yeah, no, actually, one possibility would be to say that when the WH element moves to the low periphery, criterial freezing effects make it impossible for it to move further, which would mean that, if you assume some kind of covert movement along the lines of what I was suggesting, what moves is not the whole element, but rather something closer to what Chomsky characterized as feature movement, right? Which would not incur into a violation of freezing. It seems to me that one way or another, you have got to end up with a logical form in which there is an operator in the right focus, in the right scope position, which binds a variable. So something like covert movement, either of a subpart of the, let's say, a feature of the element that is in the low focus position, or in some other way of covert movement, seems to me to be needed to end up with the right logical form.
Okay, Okay, so the fact that Q moves is not enough. But yes, I will think about this suggestion of yours. Thank you very much. It's true that an idea of, you know, an LF that is in which you have some kind of feature movement would be like an easy solution to this problem. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last question comes from the chat. Since Professor Marwan Al-Jarrah cannot use the microphone, so I just put it back in the chat. I will read it loud also for those who will rewatch the YouTube video and the video on WeChat. So Professor Marwan Al-Jarrah asks, do we have still the same pattern WH preceding object when we have verbs like put, which in English, and as he knows, and Arabic, the PP should appear to the left of the direct object, even if it is a WH word like John has put the pen where? Grammatical. John has put where the pen ungrammatical.
I'm not sure I understood the first part of the question. Was it about a special type of verb? Is that what you said?
I think so. Professor Al-Jarrah maybe can reply on the chat.
No, if you could just read again.
Okay, so do we have still the same pattern, WH preceding object, when we have verbs like put?
Mm-hmm.
Then we can
okay, so I put something on the table.
John has put where the pen.
Yes. I know those examples from Persian, if I'm not mistaken. I made the parallel in my dissertation and also in a recent article. Yes, those constructions, you have movement intervision, both when it's you know, a WH question and when it's a contrastive focus.
Okay, thank you. Maybe can I just ask a little comment if there are no other questions? Just see whether there are reasons or.
Please do.
Okay, no, just if there are no other questions, I would like to make just one comment about the ancient Chinese data. These questions are pure questions or are rhetorical questions? Because the one from the Anaclets that you showed is continuous with who did I deceive? Did I deceive the heaven?
Yeah, I know. This is the short version. I have the whole question in my thesis. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. These are the data that I know of, and everything that I know about them, I'm afraid, comes from the papers that I have cited. So Aldridge, if I'm not mistaken, treats them as answer-seeking questions, okay? She doesn't mention like echo questions or and repetition questions or rhetorical questions or anything of the sort. This is why I am making the comparison with Trevisan, because I want a comparison between answer-seeking questions, and I hope that these are, and if they're not, I hope that somewhere there are questions, okay, answer-seeking questions in archaic Chinese and Old Japanese in which you see that kind of movement.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Actually, I have a follow comment on your question. Giuseppe, the example itself is really a kind of a misleading, because it gives you an impression this is a echo question, right? Rhetorical question, right? Actually, the phenomenon is much more general. When you have in archaic Chinese, it is very easy to have this focus movement for any object, interactive object or non-interactive object. So that's why this focus fronting is not considered as a standard WH movement for classical Chinese, because it is a normal focus fronting pattern, just like non-interrogative objects.
Okay, and would you observe this kind of movement in interrogatives with other types?
Yes,
of
yes, yes, yes,
right.
yes. For object, it's very easy to get, yeah, without any because this is I deceive who, which gives you very well. It's very easy to obtain a rhetorical question, that's for sure. Yeah, but you do have other general information seeking question pattern, just like ordinary question.
Do you have any references that you can suggest? Maybe send me an email so I can work on them.
Oh,
Sorry.
yes. I can find some examples for you. Yeah, right.
Thank you. I would be very grateful.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you very much.
Can I add some words? Just some words. Can I hear you? Yes. Firstly, thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. And since you are discussing about the archaic Chinese, I would like to add something more here. In fact, in archaic Chinese, the typical word order will be SVO. Yet there are two very typical exceptionals. The one is WS question, which can be moved. The object, if the object is WS question, which can be moved before the verb.
Okay.
And the second very typical movement is if the object is a pronoun, and if this pronoun is occurred in the negative sentence, okay, in a negation structure, negative sentence, then this pronoun object can also be moved before the verb. Mm-hmm. It becomes kind of, yeah, a kind of negation, pronoun, and verb. So okay, these are two very typical movements in archaic Chinese. Other normal nouns probably do not move in the same way. So there are two very typical movements. One is WH, the other one is negation. I was also wondering whether in other languages there are also some kind of a parallelism between the negative, structures and also WH questions, because in archaic Chinese, actually, there are a lot of discussions about these two phenomena in the textbooks as well as other research articles talking about this. So I was wondering whether in those languages you are studying, there are also some kind of correlations between negation and the WS question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I must say that I didn't know of the data that you're discussing. And therefore, I'm not sure I've ever thought of negative constructions in this way. But if you could send me the references that you're citing, I could look at them and let you know what I think, whether I find this parallel in the variety or varieties that I study. I would love to do that. Okay, so please, if you have the time, send me those references. Sure. I will work on them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but here I can give you some example. For instance, the typical the word order in archaic Chinese, like know you, should be know someone. If this is someone is a person's name, or know something that is a normal noun, then the word order will be VO. But if that object is a pronoun, like myself, like self, then you have to say not self, no, not no self. So a lot of examples like this. Okay. I can send you the references or examples later.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we need to wrap up and conclude. Thank you so much, Caterina, for your nice presentation.
Thank
and
you
thanks to all the interveners for the discussion. And the next week we will fly beyond the Silk Road. We will fly to Brazil, where Achilles Tascarineto will give a presentation on his recent work. He's relatively famous for his works on Brazilian Portuguese, and we were happy to listen. And so it will be at the same time, midday 15, Padua, 7:15 Beijing. Have a beautiful day and have a beautiful week, everybody. And thanks again to Caterina.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.